Well, thank you everybody for joining. And before we start, I just want to say thank you to our dark web researcher, Sam, and then my marketing team, and then Matthew for helping us put on this webinar. With me today is Mathieu Lavoie. He is the CTO and co-founder of Flare, and he will be walking us through the state of the dark web today. I think it's going to be a really interesting webinar. A lot of kind of original research went into this. Matthew, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, thank you everyone for being here today. We got a lot of people joining, so it's super exciting. I'm super excited to be here today with you. We'll talk about a super interesting topic, which is the state of the dark web, and we'll dig down as well into the different components, and we'll show some real example, an actionable example, and we build the presentation with what's in it for everyone in it. So we will give some insight as well as some application of how you can use the data that we will be showcasing today. A little bit of my background on myself. Before I founded Flare 5 years ago with two other fantastic co-founders. Before that, I've worked as a red teamer, so I've always been into the cybersecurity space as a red teamer, more as a manager, and also more as a advisor for upper management in terms of blockchain and cybersecurity. I'm super excited to be here today. I know there's a lot of people that are expert today with us today. If we want to make this as interesting as possible, I encourage all of you to participate. You tell what you think in the chat, interact, ask question, take position. That is what make a webinar interesting. So I strongly encourage you to participate and to make this event as dynamic as possible. I would like, as Eric mentioned, to thank Sam, who is our lead, our full-time researcher at Flare. Really, Sam provided a lot of the insight that we have here. And we'll be happy to present what the two of us have discussed and decided to showcase you today. I see in the chat, unfortunately, Neville is not a panelist, but hopefully he's an attendee with us today. So if in any case you have some question, we will be able to put you in contact.
Awesome. So with that, I think it's let's get started. So before we start, this is very basic, but let's define what we're talking about. So Matthew, how are we defining the dark web for our webinar today?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, and there's different definition, and I'll try to stick to the most technical definition of what is defined dark web, which is encrypted and anonymized way to keep the identity of to anonymize the identity of a web server and a web client. So basically, it's a way to browse the internet in a way that keep the anonymity of the server and the clients as long as you stay within the encrypted network. So the dark web really would define it as Tor and the famous Tor browser, but the Tor network and the I2P network. And you see a lot of dark web being used to describe malicious activities or illicit communities, and so in that case we'll prefer to use the term illicit communities instead of dark web. The reason why is because on Tor and I2P there's a lot of legitimate communities. There's a lot of interesting communities and relevant communities, as well as we also see some illicit communities being accessible on the clear web. So bear with us with me today. If I'm doing a little bit of abuse of language by saying dark web, we will be talking more about illicit communities in that concept, and not necessarily just about Tor and I2P, but really on what are the different places we can find relevant information for the organization.
Excellent, thank you. So you'll see a lot of statistics, like there's 8 billion credentials, there's 15 billion credentials. Maybe if a cybersecurity company is feeling really ambitious with their marketing, there's 20 billion credentials. How many billions of credentials are there actually for sale on the dark web, and how concerned should companies be about those?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reposting, a lot of deduplication of credentials. So that's kind of a trick the number. In terms of unique credential, we estimate between 7 and 8 billion of unique credential being accessible. I mean, I don't want to take too much time on that. We have to talk about stolen credential and compromised credential when we talk about these communities and dark web, because password spraying is definitely a thing. But I don't want to take too much of your time because it's a little bit of the low-hanging fruit here. And what needs to be remembered here is you definitely need a two-factor authentication for every of your external services, as well as you'll need to look for leaked username and password, because otherwise, if you have a 2FA or multi-FA and then you have a leaked password, well, what you ends up doing is a one-factor dynamic authentication. The other thing we need to consider here is the freshness of the leaks. There's always kind of a time span associated with the leak credential, and what we encourage our clients to do is to take that credential, map it to the password policy to kind of find what password could be relevant, and also make sure that the user reset the password. So, I mean, on the actionable things you can do here is really to kind of continuously monitor and get alerts on your credential and validate it against the corporate credential to make sure that a user didn't reuse a password. For most of the organization, this is taken in is under control. It's not, as I say, it's a low-hanging fruit, but it's still a good conversation starter. It's still something that that could be helpful to create some awareness and training for user. And there's some relevance in looking into that. That being said, that shouldn't be the only part of your strategy considering the dark web, looking only on the credential.
So if you kind of mentioned that wasn't the core value, what do you see the core values of monitoring the dark web are for companies, security teams, fraud analysts, etc.?
We see a lot of being proactive in term of what are the new trends and new TTP that are being used by malicious actors. So I think visibility on new TTP and method being used by cyber criminals, which tied me as well to the concept of we all know the CVSS and the CVA, and like the CVSS is a well-known way of evaluating the vulnerability and the criticality, but really, as well as looking at the different chatter that happened, will give a sense of what seems to be of interest vulnerability in the specific context. So also complementing the existing scoring that is in place with additional insight that are coming from the illicit communities can definitely help you requalified or reprioritize vulnerability based on that. I think tracking the POC being exchanged by cyber criminals is also a really good thing to do, and a really good actionable information in order to develop temporary rule sets in terms of the WAF to give you a little bit more time in order to patch the problem at the source. So really kind of we see it as well with Log4j. There was a lot of IOC that were out there that was useful to kind of create an additional layer of security without necessarily being perfect, because it's rule based, but that still kind of adds a layer on top of it to give a little bit more time and comfort to fix the problem at the source properly. The last thing that we didn't discuss, I didn't see a lot of people discussing, but I think it's a strong value on the dark web, is looking into third-party monitoring, third-party breach for indirect exposure. So as you know, you're doing business with a lot of different provider and third-party. What happened here is really you have contractualization, you have contract in place that actually gauge the way the vulnerability will be disclosed, but being proactive and looking for your third party, you may have an edge by knowing early on when you have a third party that have a problem, have a cybersecurity incident, and you can work on your own strategy in order to contain the problem and evaluate how this third party breach can indirectly impact you, and how you can remediate that.
Yeah, before the third party might necessarily have notified you. That makes a lot of sense. And then, speaking of third-party breaches and cybercrime more generally, let's talk about ransomware and extortion models a little bit. What do you see as the key trends for ransomware and extortion going into 2022 and 2023?
Yeah, perfect. Before I jump into that, I just wanted to acknowledge that we have a question. I'll insert it at the end, just to make sure that because it doesn't necessarily flow into the what we're talking at the moment. So I'll keep it for later on, but I'll come back on the question for sure. Speaking of trend and ransomware, first thing we need to mention is that Logbit is now larger than Conti following the leaks of the internal document in chat, as well as the Conti leak. If you haven't followed that a few months ago, the internal chatter and the internal conversation of the Conti were exposed. A lot of interesting thing to look into that and to understand. First of all, it gives you a sense of how many victims actually pay and how many victims actually ends up getting their document being published. And that's also kind of give you a sense of how many organizations disclose the cybersecurity incident, as opposed to how many cybersecurity organizations decided to pay the ransom and kind of go with the flow and can continue as business as usual without necessarily mentioning it. So that was interesting because we see a lot of the names in the chatter that were actually not haven't been published. Some of the names were published later on, so we kind of assumed that at the time we saw the leak, it was actually into the negotiation phase with those companies, and some of the negotiations failed, and actually result of the organization data being published on the Continuous website. The other interesting part of that chatter that I find really valuable is, as myself being a red teamer, and I've always asked me the question of like, is the tooling that I'm using is actually representative of what the cyber criminal will use in order to target the organization? And really, looking at the toolings, the training documents, so all the training documents were disclosed as well as part of the leak. So you really see kind of what are the steps when they onboard a new member of the group, and what are the different training they give to the new member of the group. And really, it was the same toolings. Most of the tooling and most of the training set was aligned with what red teamer are actually using. So in that regard, that kind of answer a question that I had for a long time of like, does cyber criminals use the same tooling, and is the assessment that I'm doing to make the company more secure representative of the risk and of the threat? And so, I mean, that's a way you can find it, and you can see it in two different ways. You can see that it's a good news to have this information. It's a bad news to know that that tools could be used in the malicious way. But I mean, that's the reality, and that we should. It, in my opinion, should continue to disclose all of European and all the tools that to ensure that the organization stays secure. What we see in terms of double extortion, triple extortion, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of presentation about the different models here. What we see,
Matthew, can you pause for just a moment and make sure we give people a quick definition of double extortion or triple extortion who
I'll do
might
that.
not be aware?
Perfect. So really, the first extortion is kind of getting the data and stealing the data and asking for ransom to kind of get the data back. The double extortion is about publishing the data and creating an impact and actually creating an exposure to the company in the public space. And really, on the triple extortion model that we've seen is disrupting the business continuity, and really kind of a actor that still have access internally and say, look, if you don't pay me the ransom, like I'm still there. You're still chasing me internally, but I guarantee you that I'm still there. I'll shut up. I'll create some impact internally, and kind of getting in a way where they threaten to disrupt the course of business by taking destructive or stopping some of the server, etc. Those are kind of the example we see, DDoS attacks, etc. What we see more and more in terms of on the ransomware group is the more and more ransomware group that actually disclose the file listing at first. And the reason why is if you already been on Tor, downloading more than 100 megs on Tor is a challenge. The network is really slow, so it's really tough to kind of it's fairly a challenge, and it's complicated to get the archive if it's hosted on Tor, just because the nature of the network and just the output, not because it's difficult to find, it's just because it's difficult to acquire in terms of document. So what we see is more and more group that are actually showing the file listing. So you don't have to download the archive to kind of get some insights about the indirect exposure. We're talking in the previous slide into the concept of indirect exposure. So imagine that you are organization B and you have in the leaks of the organization A, slash business slash contract slash super secret contract with organization B. You know you're being exposed, even though you're not being breached by the ransomware group. Just by pushing out there the file listing, it gives a sense of what are the other organizations that are impacted indirectly by this breach, and what are the other information that have the information being publicly available. And that in that regard, we could see a pattern where the third party will actually put pressure on the vendor, and the organization will probably put pressure on the vendor because they are being indirectly exposed. So that's kind of we do encourage you as an organization to look into those files listing and be aware and be proactive with that information of like, okay, I have indirect exposure. This is the remediation plan that I should put in place. But as well, be cautious then if you are putting too much pressure on the victim itself, it may be in favor of that. It may encourage the strategy of this extortion strategy of like publishing the document. So look into that. Be cautious. Have the discussion. It's up to you. It's up to your business strategy to do what you want to do with that. But be cautious that it's also what we consider as a new extortion method to have business partner putting pressure on the victim itself.
So speaking still on ransomware, what do you see as the value in organizations monitoring ransomware blogs?
Well, I think we touched base a little bit on that. There's definitely some value of monitoring the ransomware log to know what are your indirect exposure and for third-party risk management. It really kind of and we experienced that with in some situation where the insight that is coming from the platform that was monitoring those ransomware blogs, the insight was sent earlier than the disclosure of the vendor that is contractually bind to disclose it to all of the business partner. So that give more time, more context to some extent, as well to kind of know, okay, in the last month, what are the information that we share with that third party? What are the evidence that we have in terms of files that are being compromised that are related to us? Does it contain sensitive information? Okay, how can we address this issue and start the incident response strategy associated with that before actually receiving the notification from the third party? So in those situations, having more time is critical, and that is one way you can be a little bit more proactive in terms of those indirect exposure.
Absolutely. And as a corollary to ransomware, obviously, how has cryptocurrency and the use of cryptocurrency evolved on the dark web? I understand that Bitcoin might not be the main coin used by malicious actors anymore.
Not anymore. This is what we observed as well, looking at the different money flow are passing to the illicit community. We see a lot of the uprise of Monero being used, and the scheme that we see here is it started with like currency, so like Canadian dollar, US dollar, euro, being converted to Bitcoin to the different exchange, because that's usually kind of the main coins, or usually the one that are possible to exchange into those more important exchange. And then so we see usually currency being converted to cryptocurrency, being converted after that to specifically Monero, and then basically a loss of track because there's no way to actually follow the money movement in Monero as is it possible to do it with Bitcoin. So we basically lost track, and then after Bitcoin exchange currency. So that's kind of the scheme we see. And as the tooling in terms of crypto forensic is more and more efficient and are able to kind of really track the regroupment of money and really associated a moniker with some of the transaction. We see a more and more as well of malicious actor that use the same technique in order to know if their Bitcoin is being clean enough, or they make enough of like money movement and transaction and like aggregating of cryptocurrency together, and what we call usually the tumbler in the cryptocurrency world, to make sure that it's by using the same technique and the same modern technique of crypto forensic to know if the Bitcoin are at risk of being flagged and being identified as associated with malicious activities. So it's really the reality here that we've seen is we see really kind of an uptake in Monero. In terms of target marketplace, I kind of use that as a segue because usually crypto are being used into marketplace. We've seen, and that's interesting. We haven't seen a consolidation since the drop and since the takedown of Dream Market. It had been fragmented. We haven't seen one winner take all. We've seen a lot of those activities moving to direct conversation and one-on-one, such as Telegram or other instant messaging platform. And the interesting things is we haven't seen consolidation into the market space, but what we have seen, for example, is consolidation of the leak market and the leak dump and the leak credential market. There was an important player that was Forum that was taken down by law enforcement, and I mean a few weeks later the place was taken back by breach, and we haven't seen the same pattern. Like when Dream Market was taken down, it really kind of created a lot of fragmented different market. What we've seen for the takedown of Forum is only like kind of a one really really kind of a breach market. The breach market took really the full place of the race forums that was the key player there. Dream Market was the most important illicit market in 2019, and it was taken down in 2019. And really, it's similar to eBay, just kind of a sense. You go there, you have vendor, you have buyer, you decide what you want to buy. You basically and really kind of see that's it becoming the main platform where actually you have the market, you have the buyer, you have the seller, and basically when the transaction is completed, the market kind of release the fund, and you have kind of an intermediary into the process that facilitate the transaction. What we've seen is most of the market, when they are being more and more in importance, they're starting to have basically a target behind their back, and we see a lot of exit scam happening. So I don't want to dig too much into that, but in a sum, this is how an illicit market operates.
So just to recap quickly, so we see an overall fragmentation, and instead of these large marketplaces on average, we see a fragmentation across other channels and one-on-one communications on things like Telegram. But then in the case of specifically like stolen credentials, that did get replaced. Is that inaccurate? That large marketplace was replaced when it was taken down.
Yes, that's an accurate statement, Eric. Yeah, in a sum, that's the difference and the curiosity here that we experience. I'm just going to do a quick time check just to make sure. Okay, we are aligned on time. So we want to take some time to Eric. I don't mean to cut you up. We want to take some time to talk about the product ecosystem.
Yep. Absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah, so speaking of fraud ecosystem, there's different systems out there that we see. And what you see, yes, being fraud occurring on the illicit market. We see fraud occurring on Telegram and data being advertised and being sold on the instant messaging platform. But we also see more organized platform where you can buy in bulk different type of information. So that's a credit card, it can be identity, it can be as well as infected machine. So we'll be talking, I think, later in that position about more specifically what are the what we call the initial access broker platform. So basically a place where you can actually buy an access or the information of an infected device. So what we see here, if we come back a little bit on the fraud side, we see a lot of those what we call auto shops. So basically you go there, you see the partial information, you add to cart, you add maybe 20, 50 of them, and then cybercriminal actually buy in bulk those credit card, those identity, and then use it for malicious purposes for sure. What is interesting for the organization is the reason why we're discussing about it today is before buying the information, there is partial information that is giving away to kind of know a little bit of like, hey, I want like this type of card from that country, from like, and usually you may have like first name on card, you may have zip code, you may have some part of personal information. And with that information, if on the financial sector, you're able to correlate that and cross-match that information with internal database, you're able to identify preemptively what are the clients of the bank that are being targeted or that the one that are at risk. What we see as well in terms of trends is synthetic identity is still continue to be en vogue, if you allow me the French expression. So really kind of be an ongoing trend into the underground community, and the reason why is there's really a lot of people that got their identity stolen. If a cyber criminal is able to create an identity from scratch with like a government number, with like a full-blown identity, well, it's way more powerful, and it's really tough to identify for banks what is a synthetic identity from what is a real identity, because I mean, this identity takes some time to build up, but if it's built up properly, it can create a lot of an impact and a lot of damage for the bank. What we see is those synthetic identity being used in order to commit fraudulent banks account opening. We see a lot of those synthetic identity as well being used on mortgage fraud. So the concept of like getting a mortgage on someone else's properties or someone else's good, and as well as any loan that are related to like a car loan or a loan to buy bigger appliance, for example, and things like that, or like about a car, etc. So we see a lot of those fraud being used by synthetic identity, and it's really a challenge for bank. I think one key to the solution is being able to collaborate and enable the collaboration and the exchange of information between the different banks to kind of when the synthetic identity has been flagged, to kind of pass the word to the rest of the peers in order to kind of create this database of a synthetic identity. So I think that's mostly what we see into the fraud ecosystem. It's still a challenging environment. It's still a lot of innovation that could be done in that space. But most of the innovation, in my personal opinion, passed through collaboration.
Excellent. And let's see. We have the Stealer malware and browser fingerprints. So I know you just released a report on this, Matthew, and I'm going to let the GIF play for just a minute, and I'll move to the next slide with the same information. But can you just provide a brief description of this?
Mm-hmm. To be fully transparent here, it's really Samuel that is that made most of the report. I've collaborated with Samuel, but it's really kind of it's really initiative, and it's really the great work of Samuel. We encourage you to get that report if you want, if that's interesting with you. I'll do kind of a segue from the auto shop and the platform that facilitate the buy in bulk of the PII or the stolen credit card, to kind of do a segue to similar platform that does the same but for infected device. So really, in terms of what we see here, we see really kind of two big trends, two big type of market. One that is closely associated with botnet that are being used, and basically a lot of infected device that happen to be infected abroad through stealer logs like Redline, Raccoon, etc. Those are kind of a malware family that infect device, may steal all the information, all the safe password, all the safe cookie on the machine, as well as kind of give back the fingerprint of the machine, so you can basically impersonate that and reuse the safe cookie and credential in order to commit fraud or to use that machine as well for an initial access to an organization. We see two types. So first of all, the one that is more like spray and pray, the untargeted approach, where the goal is to infect as many devices as possible and really kind of dump all of those devices into markets and put a price point that is the same regardless of what are the safe password, what are the safe credential that are, what is the location of the machine. So basically the machine is usually kind of around, I'd say $5 to $15, and really the goal is to be doing it at mass. So we see a lot of Redline recently using a fake Windows 11 update to kind of infect machine, or a fake update, or like all kind of, and usually pass through fake advertisement to incite and to trick the user in installing something that they think is good for the computer, but in the fact it's not. They basically get part of those botnet, and the different bots of this botnet are being resold on those platforms, as opposed to another market that we see. We'll name them and we'll see if we keep that, but we have the Russian market that is more around this approach of like spray and pray. It really spray and pray and really go by the volume. And we have something more like Genesis, and there's plenty of those platforms. That's not the only two that is available out there, but really on the Genesis one, what we see is the price range is being set depending on where the machine is. If it's a corporate machine, if it contains bank credential, if it contains cryptocurrency exchange credential, and so really kind of the concept here is really depending on what is the importance of the machine, the price will be different and the volume will be less on those platforms, but you really see that the goal is to target a little bit more different machine that could work more on those websites. So that's kind of as you see the two different approach. In terms of what is actionable for your organization, the remediation is the same. What I wanted to say here is if you have an IOC associated with a machine that is either coming from the market that is by the volume or the market that is a little bit more aligned to quality and relevance, what you want to do is you want to look at the partial IP that is being available, the host name, the partial host name that is being available, the OS name, the OS query string that is available, as well as what are the different domains and safe credential on that machine, and correlate that information. And that, I think that's a good segue for one of the information that we have in the chat about like how we integrate with Zscaler and those type of technology, is you can use the information that is available partially on those platforms, correlate that. Do we have a machine that match this profile, that have visited those sites, have a lot of activities on those sites, that match that have an IP that match the few 2 bytes that are being made available publicly on the illicit communities. So all of that, there's a way to be able to kind of pinpoint a subset of machine that could be the initial access that are being sold. And with that information, well, obviously it's to start an incident response and really kind of understand how this machine ends up being there. Because if the machine ends up being there, that's meaning that at some point a malicious actor have remote code execution on that machine to be able to steal that information and to extract this information. So it's really an IOC that indicate that this machine has been compromised or is compromised at the moment. before we move out to the other slide, last thing, it's really interesting about the market by the volume. We evaluated the proportion of which machine are like which version of Windows or version of OS, and we saw that in the last few months, Redline have a lot of machine that are Windows 10 Enterprise, almost like more than 50% of the machine that we saw being sold on those market that are by the volume were Windows 10 Enterprise. And frankly, it's something that we weren't able to pinpoint exactly the cause at the moment. But again, since I take the opportunity that we have a great community of experts here, if you have an hypothesis, if you have some insight into that, we are happy to share a result, and we are happy to discuss that with you. It's still something that is unknown, the reason why, unknown why the campaign was so successful with Windows 10 Enterprise.
Excellent, thank you, Matthew. And I would mention that this kind of provides an excellent use case for dark web monitoring outside of just stolen credentials, right? If you're monitoring for mentions of your subdomain on the dark web, and somebody puts one of these bots up on one of the markets and it includes your subdomain, there's a pretty good chance that somebody in your company has been downloaded the malware and been compromised, and their logins are now up for sale. Now the downside is you may learn way more about that employee than you would ever care to based on the other logins, but it can be useful information to get.
Yeah, exactly, Eric. Like looking for internal domain names, company's domain, intranet domains, etc. is super helpful on those platforms.
Awesome, and I don't actually have an extra slide for this, but where do you see illicit communities going in the short and medium term? And what do you think is the most important to monitor long term?
That's a really great question, Eric. And I mean, looking forward, like I think illicit communities are staying there for a while. I think we will see to continue the trend of illicit communities getting outside of those encrypted network, and such as Tor and I2P. We see a lot of those illicit communities being accessible directly on clear web, on like WhatsApp, Telegram, even Facebook groups. So I think we'll continue to see this trends of like the ease of use for cyber criminals as well. I think the ransomware, we see more and more extortion technique, and I think that is kind of a trend that we'll continue to see unfortunately innovation into the extortion technique, as well on the main, I'd say the main usage of Tor. I think it's a misconception of being associated 100% with malicious activities. I think that's really kind of also the takeaway. We see more and more people concerned by their privacy using those encrypted and anonymization technology, which is super great. So I think that will be a myth that'll have to be changed, of like dark web equals cybercrime. And last thing I think is being proactive at an organization passed by being aware of the information that is publicly available and the public exposure or your organization is being used by cyber criminals, and being proactive in trying to control this external exposure before it's actually being used by cyber criminals. In terms of data leak right now, a statistic that is super interesting is only 15% of the data breach and data leaks are caused by malicious intent, and 85% are caused by human error. So I think kind of taking the same approach of like, how can I actionate the information that is available out there to protect myself even more? It passed to illicit communities, but also passed to monitoring the clear web activity and getting some insight there of how we can use information that is available out there to cross-match that information with internal information, and really kind of have this feedback loop of getting the information out there and bringing it back in the strategy of cybersecurity of the company. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew. I think that was really enlightening. I know we have a lot of questions. I am going to take 1 minute just to explain Flare and what we do. So Flare we think of it as an automated search engine for the dark and clear web. So we monitor Telegram channels, we monitor hundreds of dark web marketplaces and billions of data points. And essentially our customers can put in identifiers, what we call search terms, what we call identifiers, and then Flare will automatically flag those as it examines the clear and dark web, and then provide prioritized insights for our customers. So with that being said, I promised 30-second sales pitch. That was it. If anybody's interested, please request a demo or talk to one of our sales folks. I think we also offer a free trial so you can experience the platform for yourself to see if you find value. Thank you everyone for attending. We really appreciate it.